to the cloud. Right, so greeting. Oh, I must say greeting. Oh gosh, that's bad stuff. Hope everyone's doing okay, and we'll see how we go. This is really quite a difficult task that I landed myself with. It's got more and more complicated and difficult, but we will have a go. We will see how we can do. And as ever, if you have any questions or suggestions or things that you would like to tell us, then please interrupt. So let's go to my little introduction. This is the title, a look at some of the Kinnot in this year of Tafshin-Pei, which is rapidly disappearing. And these are the sort of three things that we're going to look at. Number one is just a little recap, a summary. Hopefully for those of you listening to the rabbi on Tuesday evening, it will be very much a revision exercise, then a little introduction to the word Kinnot, and then a slightly more in-depth look at Kinnot. So that's for me. I think this is doing it automatically. Here are the 5 original reasons why we have Tisha B'Av as a fast day, as a sad day. The first one was due to the sin of the spies, which happened around about or on Tisha B'Av in that particular year, as a result of which so many things went wrong, and 40 years were spent wandering in the desert instead of going straight into Israel. And then the next thing we know about is the destruction of the first temple. Now, I always learned that was 586 BCE, but I now discover that there's actually an alternative date in some of the rabbinical circles of 422 BCE. So I haven't looked into that further, but that's a bit weird. Quite a big difference in the years for when it was destroyed. The second temple, some might say conveniently, was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av in the year 70. The first temple, Babylonians, the second temple, the Romans. The fourth item, here is that in the year 132, a lot of Jewish people were living in a city called Betar, and about 500,000, maybe more, Jews were killed by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt was suppressed. So that was obviously a massive tragedy. That was sort of the time when everyone thought, this is definitely Mashiach time. And it ended up with a really big disaster. Tisha B'Av again. And then the following year, the whole temple site was razed to the ground by the Romans, which just was underlying the fact that that was it. You've got no chance, Jewish people. And of course, it's been like that for many years, and we're still waiting for the temple to be rebuilt, perhaps, maybe one day. List of other tragedies that happened on Tisha B'Av. The First Crusade happened in 1095. Jews were expelled from England, from the United Kingdom, or was it England? England, probably, in 1290. Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492. The First World War began in 1914. Deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto started in 1942. And as we also heard on Tuesday evening, the last very horrible activity that happened on Tisha B'Av was in 1994 when the Buenos Aires Community Center was bombed. So I'm sure there's many more things that happen on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av seems to be a draw to tragedy, and it's also very helpful to have everything on one day, because otherwise we're going to be fasting on lots more days. As we know, we have the other fast in the year related to the temple, which one was 3 weeks ago on the Fast of Summers, and the other one is in December, January time, when we have Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, when the first breach was made in the walls. Okay, so now just moving on to the word Kinnot, which crops up and which is the subject of what I'm talking about. The singular of Kinnot is Kinnah, and the plural is Kinnot, as we just discovered that. And it means a mournful liturgical poem or poems. And there are about 50 Kinnot, which we've been reciting in shul last night and this morning. I don't know if any of you were looking at the Zoom. You would have, I don't know, it's probably really difficult to follow, I imagine, from home.
Sorry to interrupt you, Paul. Sorry to interrupt you.
I've forgotten to share screen, haven't I?
Yeah, but also there are people in the waiting room. You need to let them in.
Right.
If you want to make me a co-host, I can do that for you.
Okay, right. So I've just been on a share screen situation. Right. So let me get back.
Sorry about interrupting you.
No, you're right to do that. You're right to do that. So let's a bit out of practice with my Zoom. So let's go to Zoom and admit the people and make you the joint host. How do we do that? Participants?
Click on my name and then more, and then you can get an option to make me a co-host.
Right. Done.
Okay, done. Okay, so I'll keep my eye on the waiting room while you talk.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So let's go back to where I was. So hello to the others have just joined. Sorry about the delay in letting you in.
You had to share the screen. We can't see that screen.
No, I know. So I'm now going to share the screen. Can't remember how do we share the screen? Can you remind me how to do that?
You should have on the bottom of your screen or at the top something that says share screen in green. You've got participants and then chat and then share screen.
Yeah.
So if you click on share screen, it gives you an option of which screen you want to share.
Yeah.
And then you highlight that and then click on the bottom right hand side where it says share.
Yeah. Okay, that's better. Can you see something? Right. Right, so what we've been doing for those who have just joined is just had a quick look at Tisha B'Av, the background. And we have talked about the 5 reasons, which many of you know, the 5 original reasons. Also, I just wanted to say, which I didn't say before, that Tisha B'Av is not an entirely unhappy day. It's pretty unhappy, but as soon as we, in about another hour and a quarter, once we reach midday, the halfway between sunrise and sunset, which is, you think it would be midday, but it's actually just before 1 o'clock, distorted by the fact that we are on Israeli summertime, so that puts everything about an hour out. So yes, from midday, things become markedly less unhappy. And also, in our prayers this morning, we did, as the rabbi mentioned on Tuesday, if you heard him, we did do some of the things which we would normally do on a festival, because we're always hopeful that on Tisha B'Av we will end up one day, and again it's not going to be this year, although we've still got a few hours left, that will be the day when we no longer need to worry about fasts, and they will all be converted into festivals. So we looked at these other tragedies which happened on Tisha B'Av, which pretty well known to many of us, and we were just talking through about the word Kinnot, which is the plural of the word Kinnot and means mournful liturgical poems. And we said some of them last night in shul, and most of them are recited this morning. In fact, it's become the custom over the years. I suppose, I don't know, it's difficult to understand what happened. We've got about 50 Kinnot. Some of them are really massive, and to say them all takes a long time. And I know that in the past years, in youth service days, we used to have special Tisha B'Av youth service, and we would go through the whole lot. We'd sit there till midday, and I'm sure that in yeshivas and so forth, that's what happens. But because it's also still a work day for many people, the custom has been that in the normal shul service, it has been short. The number of Kinnot that we say has actually been shortened, sometimes quite dramatically, so that people can get away in time. Most of these Kinnot were written in the Middle Ages. They're pretty old. They're not ancient, but they go back to, well, sometime after the 7th century through to the 12th, 13th, 14th, and then there are a few at the end which are more recent. But we can go back further, and I want to take a look first, if I can work out what I have to do, at David's lament for Saul and Jonathan, which is really one of the earliest examples of Kinnot. So let's see what we can do. Hold on a second. Oh my goodness. Let me just exit full screen. Go on to here. No, it's not going to work. Okay, you'll have to take my word for it that yes, if we go back to when Saul and Jonathan got killed in the battle, David afterwards was very upset, obviously, especially, I suppose, for his mate Jonathan's passing. And he wrote a very nice lament, which you may well know about, and I did have it on my screen somewhere, but it doesn't really matter, but it's worth having a look later on. It talks about the word kinah, and it describes his sorrow for what happened. That's going back into biblical times, and then, of course, we have the next example of Kinnot, which is Eicha. Now, hopefully, I'm going to be able to find that somewhere. You look. What can you see at the moment? Can you see my face or my screen? My face. Okay. So we're going to have a look at Eicha.
Well, if you tell me what chapter, I can get it up and share it for you.
Okay. Well, I'm moving on to Eicha, which I just need to share. Hold on. Let's go back to the screen sharing. Well, I can't quite understand this. This is.
I can get it up for you. I can go.
Go on then. Eicha.
Beginning of Eicha, chapter 1.
Yeah, we'll start with chapter 1.
Okay, I'll just get it up. You carry on talking, and I'll put it up in a sec.
Okay. I don't know why I can't see it. Should be there.
Right, here it comes. There you go. Can you see it now? Give me a thumbs up if you can see Eicha, please. Yes, they can see it, Paul. Off you go.
They can see it. Oh, I've just got other things all popping up here. Oh, my goodness.
Eicha chapter 1 is on the screen.
Okay, so, I mean, I've got Eicha on my screen. I should be able to share it. I don't quite understand why I can't. So I want to look at all of each paragraph, each chapter of Eicha. Let's start with the top one then. And I want us to look at each chapter and look to see how many verses there are. So, this is really upsetting me now. Just 1 second. Okay, so if we could just look at can you get all of Lamentations of Eicha up? Is that a possibility?
I can show you each chapter at a time. We've got chapter 1, which has got 22 verses in it.
Right, thank you. And I need someone to write down for me what it says by. Okay, no. So if we look at chapter, I'm getting very confused. Lack of food. The second chapter. Can you bring that one up?
Yeah, chapter 2 is on the screen.
So that has also got 22 verses.
Correct.
And if we look at the next one, what do we see?
66.
Which is 3 times 22. And if we look at the next one,
$22.
And the following one,
22.
So then you may think there must be something in this number 22. Does anyone want to interject and tell me what does number 22 bring to your mind?
Number of letters in the alphabet.
Very good, Rabbi Dr. Lieberman. I'm impressed there. Straight in. The numbers of the letters in the alphabet. And if we now go back to number 1, chapter number 1, and we look down the, we look at the first letter in each verse, we can see the first one is Eicha, that famous word, Eicha. Aleph. Second one, Bet. Third one, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Het. Tet, Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samach. I just want you to, when we get to Samach, just keep your eye on that word, Sila. So I'm just going to write that word down, Sila, because we'll come to that in a minute. So that goes right through to the end. If we can go to the next chapter, please. And look again. Eicha, Bet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, all the way through to the end. And stopping again at Samach, we come to the word Safku. Just writing that down. Next chapter, we come to the same scenario. except that we've got 3 alephs. That's why there's 66 verses here, not 22. We've got 3 alephs, 3 bets, 3 gimels, all the way through to the end of the aleph bet. And if we can just look at the samach line again, I just need to write down the 3 words. So we've got sakota, and we've got, again, the same thing, and then we've got schi. Next chapter, please, which is back to 22 verses, and you should see, again, aleph bet, first letter of each line is the next letter in the aleph bet, and the samach line is suru. So we'll find out why that's interesting shortly. So just a very brief summary of Eicha, which is, of course, one of the 5 Megillot. Each of the Megillot is attributed to a festival, or in this case, a sad day. Most recently, we had the Book of Ruth on Shavuot. And according to tradition, this book of Lamentations, of Eicha, was written by Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. But there is a bit of a question mark over that, and the Chachamim explain that, in fact, it could be his friend, his scribe, who actually wrote the book, based on the words of Jeremiah. If you look at the actual words in Yirmiyahu, it doesn't, surprisingly, tell you anything about, literally, the destruction of the temple. So, although we're thinking that's what they're talking about, it may or may not be 100% true, because it talks about the downfall of the kingdom, the departure of the nation. There's, as I said, there's no actual mention of the word temple, and these could easily have been written before the temple was destroyed, around about the time of the death of King Yoshiyahu, decades before the destruction of Jerusalem, because we'll see again, hopefully, if we get there, that there is reference to King Yoshiyahu, basically the end of the line. Hmm? Oh, we're back. Okay, fine. Yes, so it looks like even before the temple was destroyed, a collection of Kinnot, of Lamentations, was compiled over the years, and we don't know. We can only guess at this length in time, but that's just something that should be borne in mind. So they don't describe an absolute destruction or the final end of the Jewish people, but alongside the mourning, and there's a lot of mourning in these 5 chapters, there's a lot of mourning, there is a bit of consolation, and especially towards the end, we always try and end up on a light note. So even though the last verse, have we got the last bit of chapter 5, and if you can just quickly go to that. So at the end, we do something a bit funny. Well, it's not really funny. But if you look at line 20, oh, you can't see it from this one. Yes, you can. Oh, you can. You can't see it from here. If we look at line 21, sorry, we suddenly have a bit of hope. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva, hadesh yameinu kikedem. Restore us, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. And we use this wording quite a lot during Tisha B'Av. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva, hadesh yameinu kikedem. And the next verse, the last verse of the chapter, unfortunately, goes.
I don't know that.
Alexa. Unfortunately, goes back to sad. If you have utterly rejected us, you've already been exceedingly wroth against us. We don't like to end. We don't like to end on a bad note. So what we do when we read this Megillah, is we repeat verse 21 so that we end up with the uplifting verse. We do that at least one other time, a few times in our tradition. I can give you a couple of examples off the top of my head where we don't end up with a sad note, although we should do. One is my Bar Mitzvah Haftorah, which is Rosh Chodesh. Next time we have Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, have a look at the end of the Haftarah, and you will see a bit weird that the penultimate verse is repeated at the end. So you have happy verse, sad verse, and then repetition of the happy verse, because we don't like to end in a sad note, which is what that Haftarah actually ends with. So that's one place. And another place where we don't like to end, where we change things, is on the Shir, the psalm for the day, which is Wednesday's psalm for the day, which again ends with a sad line. Not nice, not a nice way to start your Wednesday. So what we do is we go on into the next psalm, which is actually the Kutner, which we recite on Friday nights, but that's incidental. We recite the next verse or two because they are happy ones, and we don't want to start our day on a sad note. So there we go. There's a few things we picked up from there. So Eicha, we recited this morning, last night. You can do it today, anytime you like. If you haven't heard it yet, just read it through. And we have this somewhat haunting tune that many of us were brought up with. The Rabbi Ravido, he has a different haunting tune, which he did for his chapter last night. Which we use for Eicha, and we also use for the Haftarah this morning, and we use it a few times. We would have heard it on last Shabbat in Devarim. There's that verse, Eicha, where we use the same tune. So we can now move on, and let me just now get to, this will stop other people sharing. Oh, there it is. Oh dear. Safaria. I use Safaria, Mr. Dr. Dr. Lieberman. I see you use Chabad.
I have both, but Chabad I find Chabad quite user-friendly, so...
Yeah. So on this one, you can see at the end, we've done that, sorry, let's ignore that. Stop share. Let's remove that. Oh, I'll get another model again. I want to move on now to the actual Kinnot. Now, this is where it's going to get really difficult. I don't know if you've got your own Kinnot. Maybe it's just a matter of listening. I'm going to go through some of them.
You can actually get them on Safaria as well.
Yeah, I've got it. I have got it here. If I can just get myself organized. It's here waiting. Oh, here it is, right. Here we go. Here we go. Right, so I've got it there. And now I need to share it. Does that come up?
Yeah.
Right, good. So let's go back to, here we go, to the beginning. So there's about 50, as I said, of these. It's loading. Ah, dear, dear, dear. It's supposed to be loading, but it's not doing it properly. Let's try once again. I'll get past. Oh, that's because it's on day 37. Right, you can see the screen? Yeah? Okay, so Belal's there. This is the first one I want to look at, which is chapter number 3. Kinnot number 3, which we recited last night. I just wanted to point this one out to you because it actually mentions in it the sort of hard to see where it mentions it, the 5 different reasons why we have Tisha B'Av. I think this is the one. It's the one, right? Yeah. So it talks about my holy house being destroyed, the 5 harsh judgments. Okay, this is the mention of the decree against that. This is the spies, our ancestors denied entry into the Holy Land. Yeah, so that's the mention there. The next one I want to go on to is number 6, which is coming up here. Right, Shabbat Suru Meni. If we look at this, which is incidentally written by this gentleman, Elazar HaKalia, who wrote probably the majority of the Kinnot. Don't know much about him, but he's lived sometime between the 7th and the 10th centuries, from what I've found out. And he was a prolific writer of Kinnot. And you're going to look here at this one, which is the basically the first one we started with this morning. And I want you to tell me what you can see here. So the first word is irrelevant for the moment. The second is Suru, and it is the letter Samach. The next one is the letter Ayin. The next one is the letter Pei. And then we have a Tzadi, and we have a Kuf, and we have a Reish, and we have a Shin, and a Taf. Very nice. That's the last half a dozen letters of the alphabet. What has happened? What has happened to the other 15 or whatever it is? Where are the other letters of the alphabet? Well, now this moves us on to something which is a bit weird. So this is not the whole of the Kinnot at all. It's only one small part. The rest of it, I don't know if any of you have got a book of the Kinnot. The one I have brought with me from England is translated by Rabbi Rosenfeld, and it was a very nice edition. I know there's Art Scrolls editions as well. But in the one I'm looking at, in the Amida this morning, there are insertions after each of the Barachot in the Amida. And these insertions, which we don't seem to say anymore, they were obviously said at one point in time, but we certainly don't say them nowadays, but they're there in this book. They are the first 15 stanzas of his poem. So they've basically got lost. And we start with the Kinnah with letter Samach. Now, I said before, I wanted you to concentrate on the Samach items, the Samach letters, the Samach words in Eicha. If you remember, in Eicha, each chapter has 22 verses, each of which start with the letter of the Aleph Bet. And now here we are going to find out what this rather clever poet has done with the letters of his alphabet. Starting with the samach, which is here, suru. Now suru, if any of you remember, was one of the words I wrote down. I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. Suru, Sachi, Schuta, Safku, and Sela, I think. So here we have Suru. Move along, because it's not just the first and the second word that's got the samach. So it is this one. Sachi. Yes, that's one of the words I wrote down. Let's carry on to the end of that line. And we have Sukkota. Yes, that's another word that I wrote down. And then we come to the next one, which is here, beginning of the next little stanza. Sakota, which is similar to that one. Do you remember there were 2 very similar words? Well, there's the other one. And then we have this word, safku, and that is indeed one of the words I wrote down, which leaves, finally, this one, which was actually the first one, so he's doing it in reverse order. Sila, yeah, Sila, ignore the kaf. Sila is also from Eicha. So this amazing poet has gone through the book of Eicha, and he has looked at each letter in the alphabet, and he has taken them out and put them, in his own words, into a poem, into the Kinnot. You can do the same thing in your own time. We're not going to do it now for sure. With the next one, which is ayin, 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 and they all come from the ayin lines in Eicha, and so forth. Pay, 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 pay. It's really quite brilliant, because he then uses those words and makes some sort of sense from it. Happiness is ceased. Apart from me, I hear from my detractors. Those who were once friends called me dirty and repulsive. You've separated yourself by placing a canopy over your holy of holies. You concealed yourself and allowed the defeat of my great men. My enemies cheer when I stumble, trampling on all warriors. Well, that's quite a feat, isn't it? If you're given, it's like one of these games that they have used to at school or whatever, where they give you 8 words and they say, right, make a sentence out of this that is meaningful. So he does it 22 times. Incidentally, I hear you ask, well, what's all this business about 22 and the letters of the alphabet? Why? Why are we doing this all the time? And we're not only doing it in Eicha, we're not only doing it here in our Kinnot, not all of them, by the way, but quite a lot of them. But if you look through your Siddur, your normal weekday prayers, you will find several of them are in the same format. Aleph, Bet, Gimel. 2 reasons that come to mind. One of them, it does help if you don't have books, as they didn't used to have at the beginning, or maybe you're just trying to remember the prayers. It does help if they're in alphabetical order. It gives you a clue. But having said that, if you've got like 20 of these Kinnot, which are all starting with the same alphabet letters, it probably is not going to help you that much. But I think the main thrust of it is that by having something starting with each letter of the alphabet, you are trying to say it's complete. It's a bit of everything from the start to finish, from the aleph to the taf. And it's sort of a mystical thing as well, to make sure that all elements are included. Okay, so I wanted to just show you that. Thought it was a bit interesting. And I'm just going to go through a few more. It's going to be a bit difficult to do because you haven't got the... Yes, so I thought when I found this here, it's great. It's all there. It's all translated into English very nicely. Unfortunately, the English soon gives up and we don't have it anymore. You can Google translate it, but it sort of comes out a bit rubbishy. You may remember before I spoke about Jeremiah's lament for Yoshiyahu, for King Yoshiyahu. And here we're talking about it a bit more. So in this particular Kinnah, just 1 second, let's go to my notes. Yes, so in this Kinnot, the author is relating all the incidents that happened to Yoshiyahu, the king of Judah. Since Jeremiah commemorates the 4th chapter of the book of Eicha, going back to Eicha, we didn't look at that, but in the 4th chapter, he's really talking about Yoshiyahu. The author borrows the first, and here again, we've got another situation where the author of this poem is taking the first word from each verse of that chapter. So another interesting use of wordplay. These Kinnot are not just made up from nowhere and with no thought. They've all got some relate. They relate back in some way to Eicha. They relate back to the Tanakh in one way or another. And here we also have a good example about that. Now, I want to have a look at number 17, which again is not going to be very helpful for you because it's all in Hebrew. But why do I want to look at, oh yeah, actually this is one that's translated, that's why we're going for this one. I just wanted to show you how horrific some of the text is actually in these Kinnot. So look away now if you're a bit squeamish. It talks about women eating the fruit of the womb, their little babies. It talks about women boiling their children. It talks about the fine locks of their head all being cut off. It talks about the nursing baby because there's no food and there's no nourishment, glued to his top of his mouth, to his palate from thirst. Let's boil our sons. Give your son to eat. Slice him in slices. It's just horrific. I mean, we garble it away in Hebrew, but if you actually take the time to find out what we're reading, it really is horrible. And the fathers can season their sons, and daughters with their distended bellies, bloated with rot. Okay, probably good. It's good that it stopped there. There's some really frightening descriptions, and no holds barred. Obviously, what went on Tisha B'Av in all those instances were horrific. They were things we can't even imagine. So the temple's destroying. People often say, oh, why should we fast destruction of buildings? So we're not really, I mean, that's part of it, but we're not really bothered about the buildings. We're bothered about what happened to all the people in all those other instances, the death. Going back to the original one, where because of the spies reports, the whole generation of Jews was wiped out in the desert over 40 years. You may think they would have died anyway, but maybe they wouldn't have all died. And all the other examples we looked at earlier on involved millions and millions of Jews and other people dying. And it's really, we're just pushing all the horrible things that happened into our fast and into Tisha B'Av. So now let's look at number 21. It's good that they're numbered because it helps. Number 21. Right, so I'm going to just look at my English translation because this one is not translated. And I'm going to read it out to you in extracts because this one, called Arze Halavanon, is all about the 10 martyrs. Do you remember on Yom Kippur? It's probably in one of the bits when there's not so many people in shul, but there's a whole bit there about the martyrs, the 10 martyrs, vivid descriptions of what happened to them. So it's here as well, and it talks about the great champions in Mishnah and Talmud who told at their books, behold, the 10 martyrs who were massacred by the dominion of Rome. Their blood was shed, for these do I weep, and my eye gushes forth. When I remember, I cry out bitterly. for all these wonderful people who were killed. It talks about how they drew lots to see who should first be killed, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, he bared his neck and he wept when the decree was issued. The Roman general returned to Rabbi Shimon to kill him. And Rabbi Ishmael was weeping, took his head, laid it on his. It goes through one after the other of the people. Rabbi Akiva, who also they flayed his flesh with an iron comb, and he died memorably reciting Shema. Rabbi Yehuda, how did they kill him? He was 70 years when he was killed while he was fasting. Rabbi Hananiah, he was also killed they wrapped him up in a scroll, and they placed bundles of vine tendrils around him and set him on fire, adding around his heart some damp wool so that he wouldn't die that quickly. It's horrendous. If you go through, I won't carry on because it gets worse and worse. But it spares it doesn't spare anyone the details of what happened at that time. The next one I'd like to look at is number 31. Number 31. '31. And here we have it's a change in design now. Got rid of the alphabet, and it's much shorter. You can see each line is shorter. And what it does is it contrasts the Exodus from Egypt. You see it says here, every other line, but B'tseiti mimitzrayim, contrasts the Exodus from Egypt with B'tseiti mirushalayim, with the Exodus from Jerusalem. So obviously one was a pretty amazingly wonderful event when we left Egypt. The other, the opposite. So let me turn to my English here and give you a few examples, because it just gives you a nice idea of what the poet is, who we don't actually know who it is, but what he's trying to say. So the first one is, a fire of joy is kindled within me as I think of the time when I left Egypt. And then, so that's a high note, and then a low note, but I'm raising my own lamentations as I recall the time when I left Jerusalem. Then Moses sang, Az Yashem Moshe, when a song unforgettable, when we left Egypt. And who wrote a song this time? Jeremiah. He wrote a mournful book and wailing with bitter lamentations when we left Jerusalem. A couple more examples. My house, the Mishkan, whatever you want, the temple was established, and the cloud dwelled in God's presence was in the cloud above. That's when we left Egypt. What about now when we're leaving Jerusalem? Well, we've got the Ka'anana, that's the same word, Anan, yes. God was looking over the Jewish people in the clouds, but here Ka'anana, which turns into a female cloud for some reason. But here we're saying that the wrath of God, Hamat El, lay upon us like a dark cloud when we left Jerusalem. Galayam. Well, that's just down here in Green Beach, isn't it? Galayam. The waves of the sea roared and piled themselves up like walls when we left Egypt. And what's the opposite? They came back. The proud waters overwhelmed and flowed over our head, drowning everybody. So it carries on like that, giving all the wonderful things that happen compared to all the horrible things. Another one is Sabbaths and festivals I enjoyed, signs and wonders when we left Egypt. What happens when we leave Jerusalem? Fasting, mourning were my lot, and so on and so forth. So that's a different way of writing the poem, of writing a Kinnot. I want to look at number 34, number 34. 34. Why do I want to look at number 34? Because I want to show you, hold on a second. Yes, number 34. We have been used to the Aleph Bet convention for writing these Kinnot, and here we're going off on a slightly different angle. This Kinnot was actually written by Yehuda Halevi, and he has decided he's not going to go with convention. He's going to do something a bit different. So you can see it. Yeah, let's have a look at the beginning of each paragraph. So the first one is a Yud. The second paragraph, you can see it's slightly darker, is a Hey. Yud, Hey. The next paragraph is way down here. We've got a Vav. The next paragraph with the dark letter is a Daled. And not such a long bit there, but the final paragraph is a Hey. And here we have the man who wrote the poem, making sure he will be remembered that he wrote it, Yehuda. That's what those letters spell out. So that's something to take note of. I want now to look at number 41. Not sure if people are falling asleep or managing to keep with me. 41, not the most amazing topic, but we do need to look at it, I suppose, because that's what it's all about. Number 41 is down here. So number 41. Yes, this is a bit interesting because it's a different subject. This one actually is talking about Sha'alei Serufa, Ba'esh. You might recognize those words, fire and burning. And actually, just hold on one second while I turn to it in my book. Yes, it's written by Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. He lived in the 13th century, and included in this is, well, this whole Kinnot is all about something awful that happened in France, in Paris. I think it was, according to what I can see, it was around about 1242, when the Talmud, other Hebrew manuscripts, the Torah, they were all burnt in the middle of the town. And it was an absolute tragic day for the people at that time. So this one, we won't look at the translation because it doesn't really help too much, but it does indeed tell you all the horrible things that happened. And this was in France rather than in Israel. And if you've got an English version of the Kinnot, you'll know that towards the end, there are a couple that have been inserted for the tragedy that happened in York. Certainly you don't find that in the Israeli version. And I'm sure you don't find it in the Art Scroll version either. That's specific to England, when the people who lived in York were they ended up being killed, but they all sought shelter in the tower, in the castle. It didn't work, and there's a memorial. If you go there now, many of you would have been. If you ever go to York, one of the must-visit places, the top of the hill, and you will see the story explained to you then. I think, how are we doing for time? What's time now? Yeah, okay, we just got time to have a little slightly in-depth look at one before we draw to near to the end. So I want to have a look at number 26. Hold on a sec. Let's get to it. Number 26. So number 26, here we go, is a bit of a mysterious story. It's a story about Jeremiah, whose name keeps popping up, doesn't it, today? It's his day. Not sure if that's how you want to be remembered, but I suppose it's better to be remembered than not be remembered. So in this Kinnot, it talks about Jeremiah, who this mysterious story. It imagines that the prophet Jeremiah, he's the fellow, as we know, who prophesies the destruction of the first temple. And he tried without success, if you remember, to persuade the Jewish people to turn back to God because they were just not following him. And he decided to pay a visit to the graves of our forefathers, of our patriarchs, and indeed matriarchs. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. It seems from this Kinnot that Jeremiah wanted to inform the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and Moshe. He wanted to tell them what was going on, and he wanted to get them to intercede and ask God to stop destroying the temple and exiling the Jewish people. He hoped that he would get our forefathers to arise from their slumber in their graves and do something about it. Help. So how did they all react? He went to each of them in turn, and let's see what happened. I'm going to look at my English translation. So he goes to Abraham, and Abraham says, he implored God, and he said, "You tested me with my 10 trials, and now I'm looking at this disaster. Where is your promise, God?" And he reminds God, "Fear not, Abraham." That's what God had told him. And God replied, "Well, I'm sorry, they erred. The Jewish people have erred in permitting worship of idols. They've forsaken me, and they've had it. I'm not going to listen to you." So then Jeremiah went to Isaac, to Yitzhak, and he also came across a verse that he thought would help God change his mind, because God had said to him, he promised to him, "I will establish my covenant with Isaac." But God said, "No, they've rebelled against Jeremiah. They're ignoring Jeremiah. They've defiled the Temple Mount. I'm fed up listening to their moaning, and I'm going to go ahead with the destruction." The same, he goes to Yaakov, to Jacob, and Jacob tries to persuade him as well. No luck. He goes to Moshe. Moses was wallowing in ashes and dust, and he opens his lips and said, "These Jewish people, the sheep that were tended in my bosom, they're sheared before their time. God, you promised me that Israel is not widowed. You made that promise that Israel will never be widows." Apparently, we won't get into where that comes from, but it's there somewhere. And he just gets ignored, completely ignored. He then turns to Leah, who beat her breast and sobbed. He went to Rachel, who was weeping for her children, even Zilpah and Bilhah. He tried them all. No luck. So that was a bit of a sad ending, but I just wanted to draw your attention. We're not going to go into it now, but if some of you, when I mention the word Rachel, you may have thought to yourself that means something to you, because yeah, just at the end of here it says, hold on a second. Yes, it does say when he goes to Rachel that there is something actually a bit more positive about it. There's a line there which says, "I will bring back your children from exile." So while they don't stop him doing the destruction, he does give hope for the future, which is also what we keep saying. We've got hope. We always have to have hope. That's what's kept the Jewish people alive. In fact, the ex-Chief Rabbi Sachs had a little video he put up yesterday when he was talking about how important hope is. That's what we are bringing to the other nations, how you have to have hope, and that's the only way to keep going. So here we've got an instance of that as well. So yes, just going back to the Rachel and crying, it may have jogged some of your memories, and there's a whole other area to go on from here if you ever want to. Just look up Rachel's tears, and you can see how Rachel's crying and Rachel's actions had a lot of influence upon the history of the Jewish people. In brief, although she had a pretty tough life, she died young in having her second child. She got trounced at the wedding night by her sister, by Leah, and she had to wait a long time before she became the wife of her beloved. But because of her actions, something that she did, quite amazing, we can learn a lot from that. There was hatred between her and her sister, as you can imagine. But then suddenly everything changed at the point when she was going to. Do you remember the time when the mandrakes? That story. If you look at that, it's actually how Rachel was involved in helping her sister have another child, and from then on, they sort of got back together. You don't hear any more bad stories between the two sisters, and yeah, it's worth looking up. But it's due to Rachel and her tears and her compassion and her reconciliation that many of the happier things that happened to the Jewish people have occurred. Okay, so that was that in a bit more depth. Finally, let's have a look at the end, which is this Elizion, the final one in the book, the final Kinnot, which is it may be familiar to you. Elizion v'areha kamo isha v'tzireha v'chivtu lacha guratzak al ba'ala ureha. That tune, you may have heard that tune before. You may have heard it last Friday night, for example, if you were listening to the service, or indeed attending the service outside the shul. Because we use this tune for the Chadodi in the week, or the Shabbat prior to Tisha B'Av. Normally, we're not supposed to show any signs of sadness on Shabbat, of mourning. This one creeps in, and it's sort of, some people frown upon it, but I think it's a custom that's sort of really taken over. We sing this tune to L'Chadodi V'Grad Kala B'nei Shabbat Nekabela. It's a really nice tune, isn't it? Even though it's a sad tune, it's a jolly tune. Although in our shul we don't stand up. Certainly I was always used to the fact that we do stand up for this one. We stop our sitting on the floor or on a low chair. We stand up and we sing this song loud and clear because it's giving us a bit of hope, although it's still mourning for God's exiled servants, mourning for the chatter of the dancers, mourning for the sacrifices, mourning for the babes of the kings and the beauty, the glory, mourning for the wounds, mourning for the joy of the people that rejoiced over Israel's downfall, mourning for the sins, mourning for the voices, mourning for all the, but we end up with, it's not the last one, is it? It was the last one in Shaw's today. But it's giving us some incentive to look towards a happier future. Well, I don't know. We've looked at a few of the Kinnot. They're very different. They're written in quite intense Hebrew, as you can imagine, Middle Ages Hebrew. Although, on the other hand, it's quite incredible that what was written in the Middle Ages we still read, and it does indeed still apply to us. Hold on a second, there's still people coming in. So there we go. I could go on and look at every one of them, but I'm not going to, because it's enough already, as they say. Stop share. Let's stop share. Anyone got any thoughts of their own that they've learnt over the years about Kinnot and Tisha B'Av? Love to hear them. Anyone? Anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to recommend to everybody to look at the anybody who's got an Art Scroll Tisha B'Av service. I think most of you know my views on Art Scroll, but credit where it's due. They have done a brilliant job on the Kinnot. It's a very difficult, they're very difficult, as Paul has pointed out. It's difficult Hebrew. The commentary underneath the line in the Art Scroll Kinnot book is superb. There's one particular one which is about the Crusades, and I haven't got it right in front of me at the moment. It's downstairs. But the commentary on the Crusades gives a very, very good background. If anybody would like to borrow it, I have 3 copies of the Art Scroll Kinnot book. It's one of the advantages of having a number of children. So I've got 3 copies. If anybody would like to borrow it and read through some of the commentary to those Kinnot, it would be a very worthwhile exercise. I'm here at home for the rest of the day. Anybody who wants to come and borrow one, just pop round and I'll give it to you with the greatest of pleasure, or else I can give it to you at Mincha if you want later on. But that was definitely worth looking at, is the Kinnot that were composed for the Crusades.
Can you let us know what number that is?
I will. I'll just go downstairs and get it now. So talk amongst yourselves for a sec while I go and get it.
Nice to see you, Susan.
Yeah, Sharon, you were going to say something. I can't unmute you.
Paul.
Muted.
Hang on, you're muted. Say it again. Oh, right.
I was just going to say thank you, Paul. I thought I learned a lot, actually. I didn't know before, so thank you for that. It's very hard to give a share this morning in the heat, and I learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I've had to put the air conditioning on because it was too much for me. Very sad.
Marcel wants to say something.
First of all, very interesting. Thank you very much. Just something came to mind when you said that everyone of the Yetziat Mitzrayim perished, but they didn't. Sarah Bat Asher didn't perish. She came down from Mitzrayim and she went back to Eretz Israel. She survived the whole time.
Yeah. Well, 2 other people as well, weren't there? 2 men survived.
Think about it.
It wasn't to criticize you, it just came into my head.
There were more than 2 men. There was Caleb and Yoshua, who you're referring to. But it's very interesting because I only thought about this recently. We were learning through our Sefer Yoshua and Sefer Shoftim, and it's very clear that Pinchas also survived and wasn't killed. And I was always taught there was only Kalev and Yehoshua who survived. Marcel's right, Serach bat Asher, but we don't count her because she's a woman. But Pinchas, he survived as well. So actually, all those years of being told that only Kalev and Yeshua survived actually wasn't true. So I'm just looking for the number of this Crusades one. Just give me a moment.
Yeah, so while you're doing that, just to remind everyone, when we go back for Mincha this afternoon service at 7 o'clock, we have to remember, and it's something I've forgotten, I don't know, it must be 5 times in my life. I'm running off to shul, and then I have to run all the way back again because I've forgotten my tefillin bag. We put our tefillin on in the afternoon and our talit, so don't forget to do that, which proves the rule, by the way, because normally we do it in the morning, don't we? It proves the rule. Actually, you can put your tefillin on any time in the day. So if you're not able to do it in the morning, doesn't matter, you've got the whole day. You can do it later on. And in the afternoon service, we add in the normal laning for a fast day, and we have the Haftarah as well.
Sorry. Hello, hang on 1 second, hang on.
It's Hancock's half hour. Paul, you mentioned the Kinnot.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Let's just mute a few people. Yeah, carry on.
I say you mentioned the Kinnot at York for the York massacre. And I have a copy of it. I was very fortunate to be in York when the cherem was lifted by ex-chief rabbi, the late chief rabbi Jacobowitz. There was a gathering of Jewish people from all over the country, and we went to the top of Clifford's Tower, and as I say, the cherem was lifted and the shofar was blown, and it brought to an amazing end that very, very difficult period in the history of the Jews in York.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Do you remember when I've got a vague recollection, I think, of when that was?
I think it was about 1995. I'd have to look it up, something like that.
But it's relatively recent, isn't it?
Oh, it's recently, yes. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah, incredible.
If it was Chief Rabbi Jacobowitz, then it would be pre-91. Jonathan Sachs took over in 91.
Right. Well, then it was Jacobowitz. So it must have been them. Yeah, I have to look it up.
Susan, on that night, the York Minster roof burnt down.
Was it on that night?
Yes,
Yes, that's right.
There was a fire in the York Minster and the roof burnt off.
Who is it who's saying that? I can't see who's saying it.
Marcel Glasky from
Oh, right. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's an amazing conjunction of events.
Yes,
Well, what happened in York? I don't know. I don't understand. What happened?
There was a massacre of the Jews in the Middle Ages.
The
This
Jews
is all the
were
time of the Crusades and the...
by who? People in England?
Yes. Yes.
And what did we do in 1990s about it? I don't understand. What?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. The municipality wanted to build a road, and it went through the cemetery where all these people were buried. So they did a deal with the Bed Din of Manchester, and they exhumed all the remains and they reburied them in Manchester as a temporary basis. When the road and everything was finished, and the roadworks, all the works were finished, the York municipality gave a new plot for reburying the people. So they brought the remains back and reburied them. And at that moment, the cherem was lifted, because since the massacre in the Middle Ages, up to that time, Jews were not allowed to spend the night in York.
Wow.
Just to go back to the original cause of this, in 1190, And this was at the behest of the coronation of the coronation of Richard I. There was a very strong anti-Jewish prejudice in England. The Jews were herded up into the York Cathedral and were massacred as a gift to Richard I, as a sort of coronation gift. And of course, because they were all massacred, all their money went into the crown, which is what the gift was. And a cherem, a ban, was put on it. Very, very unusual to have a cherem. A cherem was put on that no Jew was allowed to sleep overnight in the city of York. And it's this cherem that was eventually lifted shortly before 1991. We'll have a look in a moment and see if I can find the exact date for you. But that's what Susan was talking about, the lifting of the cherem. And what Marcel is talking about was when they reinterred the bodies of the massacred Jews. That wasn't at the same time as what Susan was talking about. That was quite a bit later, Marcel.
I stand to be corrected.
Yeah, but what you are right on is that the York Minster was struck by lightning, not at the time that the cherem was lifted, but at the time when the bones were reinterred, which was much later. Let me see if I can find it on Google.
Amazing.
The reinterment in York.
While he's doing that, of course, we have an instance of the whole country being under cherem, which was Spain.
Yes.
For many, well, since 1492, and that was also very relatively recently lifted.
You know what's amazing? We have been thrown out of so many places all over Europe. Even an attempt was made in America, and President Lincoln stopped it from going any further. But it seems to me that we continue to get these messages wherever we live, in which they kill us, they destroy our livelihoods, they take everything we have, and we still don't get it. If there was ever a message from all of this destruction, it is get out of where you are and go where God decided that you should be from the very beginning, in Eretz Yisrael. But we just don't get the message. And we continue to be destroyed wherever we are. If it's 100 years or 500 years, it doesn't matter. Eventually, God does something which makes us reconsider where we are and what we're all about. And we have ignored it for 2,000 years. And I'm so grateful I got a chance to live at this time of the Jewish people's history, to be able to sit in Netanya and listen to all of this and say no more.
Oh, lucky you.
There's one problem with that, which is absolutely right. But the problem is, if you go back, we were all in Israel. And what happened? We got chucked out of Israel. So it's not necessarily a forever answer. If everyone comes to Israel, then unless everyone is going to keep all the rules and regulations,
Lucky
it's
you,
going to happen again.
Lucky you, Nachum.
What? God is merciful. God cares about the Jewish people.
Well,
And
yeah, if you read all these Kinnot, you sort of think he's merciful, but he's got a bit of a cruel streak as well.
No.
If
he had a cruel streak, you and I would not be Jews looking at each other at this moment. If God
and some people need a harsh lesson to make them realize.
Let me just give you the answer for Hillary. It's Kinnot number 25, which talks about the Crusades. It's the first of the Kinnot, which is not about the Beit HaMikdash. It was written specifically for the Crusades, And in the Art Scroll book over here, this one here, which is definitely worth getting or borrowing from me, it's on page 272, 273 and onwards. And there's a very, very good and detailed commentary about the Crusades in there, and that's definitely worth a read. What's interesting within that commentary is something which I think Nachum would be interested to hear. And what they're saying here is, listen to this, Nachum, you'll like this. It says the destruction of the Jewish community of Worms, that's W-R-M-S, where Rashi is, in the German Rhineland, was the work of the Crusaders. How ironic, they write. The Crusaders were willing to leave everything behind, their homes, their families, their occupations, in order to conquer the Holy Land, while the Jews themselves were filled with no such zeal to regain their own homeland. In heaven, this irony did not go unnoticed, but aroused a terrible denunciation against the Jewish people, and especially against the Jews of Worms and her neighboring communities. This is it, Nachum, you're listening carefully? The success of Worms was its undoing. The prosperity of the Jew in exile is nothing more than a divine test to see whether it will cause the Jew to forget his homeland and his heritage. Worm and the Rhineland failed and suffered bitterly. In our own times, the vast majority of the German Kehillah failed because, as the Meshech Chochmah observes, they began to call Berlin the New Jerusalem. We can't hear you.
In New York, I've heard people say this is the New Jerusalem in some of the communities there. You know, that is the most profound statement that I've heard, and it makes me understand much better. I mean, I was thinking of myself, but to hear it said outside of my own thinking is something we should really start thinking about as a group. We have to be soldiers to have this happen again in the communities that we come from. And I think if we don't talk about it and we don't make people feel uncomfortable outside, they're just going to stay there again. What you just read to me is profound. It's exactly what's going on today.
So, first of all, I'd just like to thank Paul for that excellent presentation. Paul, there are enough Kinnot for you to do that every year for the next 20 years. So you've got the job.
Actually, that won't be necessary because, as we know, if he's not coming this year, Mashiach comes next year. So.
Oh, you're quite right. I forgot. Yeah. Okay, you're quite right. I stand corrected. But were that to fail, then we have enough material for you to repeat that again. Please God, if we have to do it in the future. So as it so happens, Nachum, I am going to speak this afternoon a little bit about what you've just spoken about in the shiur on the prophecy of Zechariah. So you might want to just have a look at chapter 7 of Zechariah sometime before 5:30. But before that, we have Ravido at 4:30 with a shiur on the halachot of ascending Har Habayit, whether we're allowed to, al pi halacha, go up to the Temple Mount.
In English?
In English, yes, in English. All in English. That's at 4:30. And then straight after that, I will give the shiur on Zechariah, and then will be enough time to go and get your talis and tefillin on for mincha, which will be at 7 o'clock.
Do you think that this, can I ask you something? Yes. Do you think, as I think, the Mashiach, this concept of a Mashiach, has been very destructive to the movement of the Jewish people from Galut to our land, like you just described, the most beautiful description. if we stop waiting for Mashiach and start doing our own behavior without Mashiach, maybe we won't have this excuse, which I think has been an insidious, destructive idea for the Jewish people to remain where they are. What do you think?
Let's see what Hillary thinks, because
well, Rav Ido seems to think, and I tend to agree, that the concept of Mashiach is a personal thing, that it's within you. Mashiach is within each person. And if you feel that you've arrived, I mean, there's always room for improvement, but if you feel that you've arrived at your place, your destiny, or whatever they call it, then Mashiach is basically here for you to a certain extent. And if everybody felt that way, if everybody behaved in a way that they could bring Mashiach, we'd be a lot closer. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Anybody else like to say something on that before I do? Okay, well, I'll tell you what I think, Nachum, for what it's worth.
Good.
I happen to agree with you to a very high degree, because whilst I 100% agree with what Hillary's just said and what Rabbi Doe has said, which is that Mashiach is a concept, the problem that we have is that there has been historically, the way that Mashiach has been presented, or the idea of a Messiah has been presented to the Jewish people, has been of a miraculous nature, of a person who will come, and the Gemara speaks about this, do miracles, rebuild the temple, preceded by Eliyahu Hanavi, riding on a white donkey into Jerusalem. And these mystical ideas have been presented to the Jewish people as literal facts. Now, all of you who have been to any kind of Orthodox cheder, some of us, including a couple of us here, have actually taught in Orthodox chedorim. And I've no doubt, I certainly did, I taught the same stuff to the kids, that Mashiach, one day Mashiach will come and the whole world will be miraculously peaceful, and the lamb will lie down with a wolf and all that kind of stuff. And the problem is that concept, which is fine for young children to try and understand the concept, was presented as the default position. And the more mystical the grouping of Jews, the more, the stronger that feeling of we must wait for Mashiach, which is why there is a very significant and numerous group of people amongst our brethren who do not accept that we should be here in the land of Israel, running the land of Israel, sovereign in the land of Israel, because we should be waiting for this Mashiach to come. Now, so that is what is presented as the Orthodox view of Mashiach. Anybody that starts to talk in the same way as Hillary just spoke about, that Ravi Doe has spoken about, and that I've spoken about, are seen by many people as being outside of the Orthodox camp, because you're meant to wait for Mashiach every day, and you're meant to wait and wait and wait. I happen to agree with you that my view is that Mashiach is a concept. It's not a person, it's a concept. It's a concept of tikkun olam, of repairing the problems in the world, of the Jews being brought back to their ancestral homeland, and kibbutz galuyot, which we've spoken about, the lost tribes. We're going to speak on Sunday night. Danny Limor is going to speak again about bringing back Jews. there's no question that in the last 120 years, steps towards all the things which will happen when a Mashiach-like time will occur have started to happen, which is why Rav Kook and the followers of Rav Kook described the era as Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, the beginnings of our Geula, of our redemption. But the problem we have is that not everybody sees it that way. And there are a very significant number of people who don't believe that we should get up from wherever we were and go back to the land of Israel. We have to wait until this mystical character of Mashiach arrives. Now, that is a very, very firmly held belief amongst a large section of the Jewish people. And who's to say they're right or wrong? You know, one man's meat is another man's poison. So that's a problem that we have in terms of the concept of Mashiach. We can't hear you. Unmute. Unmute.
Why can't you say they're wrong? Where did God say that this is the way we should deal with our lives on this earth? Where? He tells us he's going to bring us back. It doesn't say anything about a Mashiach. We daven it every day. I'm going to gather all of you from everywhere and bring you back home. God, we have been living this news of Mashiach to our own detriment. Look how we lived in Spain. This was an amazing group of Jewish people. I mean, most important Jews of the times. And where were we? Expelled again. Where were we in England? Expelled again. In France, expelled again. Expelled means you leave one place and you're forced to go somewhere else. Where did we go? To Portugal. Where do we go? It took a Holocaust, a complete attempt to exterminate us, something Hashem would never, ever do. An attempt to exterminate us. And finally, all of a sudden, the Jews ended up where God wanted them to come for 2,000 years. Why are we still holding on to this nonsense?
You present a very powerful argument, Nachum, but as far as, well, certainly as far as I'm concerned, I can't speak for everybody else who's here, but as far as I'm concerned, you're preaching to the converted. I agree with you absolutely entirely. You asked the question, why can't we say other people are wrong? I'm very reluctant to say that another group of Jews is wrong. I happen to think that they are mistaken. I happen to think that what you have said is correct. But, you know, who am I to say? You know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so. And I think that what you've said is perfectly logical, rational, emotional, and correct. But you have to accept that there are a large number of our brethren who think that you are not only wrong, but are actually an apikoros, are actually a heretic for saying so. So
I wear the badge with honor. If that's
Carry on.
Oh,
Thank you, Paul.
you know, when I read all the rotten, disgusting things that happened to our people in Yerushalayim, and when we heard the discussion in Masada, I just can't understand why we don't take this time to stop mourning and grieving for what we have been doing forever and begin to elevate ourselves to a happier time of this day. This day is a day that
I'm going to deal with this afternoon.
we've endured.
I'm going to deal with this afternoon. Read Zechariah chapter 7, and I'll see you at 5:30.
Well, thank you for listening to me. We're